A horse trapped in a concrete pit fights for her freedom as construction workers enjoy their lunch break nearby. When a couple discovers her plight, they spring into action, racing against time to save her from a grim fate. Will they succeed? Watch the rescue unfold on The Unusual. Iriska ambled down the path, her owners allowing her to graze freely. This freedom enabled the horse to selectively forage on the most succulent patches of green and independently access the river for hydration. The concept of escape never crossed her mind. She was content on the outskirts of a quaint town. She never ventured into the hustle and bustle of the town's heart, but followed a familiar route home, one embedded in her memory. Adjacent to the road was a concrete fence outlining the construction of future dual-level residences, which Iriska avoided due to the cacophony of construction noises. Opposite this location were several deserted outbuildings that, despite being uninhabitable, still hoarded miscellaneous items. The mysteries of these sheds were unknown to the horse, who prioritized the lush grass several yards away. As per their morning routine, Iriska's owners led her out to graze. She meandered down the street, skillfully avoiding imperfections in the terrain. Abruptly, the hum of an engine echoed from a distance. Alert, Iriska turned her ear toward the noise and faced the road. There was no sign of an impending vehicle yet, but the sound was coming from beyond a curve. Feeling an urgency to avoid the vehicle, the horse picked up her speed. The metallic behemoths, radiating noxious fumes and producing obnoxious sounds, were not her favorite scenarios. Despite Iriska's brisk pace, the vehicle appeared suddenly, accelerating around the bend at full throttle. Iriska moved toward the edge of the road, but the driver had a different agenda. "Hey, check out the mare," he smirked. A curious thought popped into the passenger's mind. "Think she can go airborne?" he mused. "Let's unnerve her." "Let's do it. Makes for an enjoyable time," chimed in the driver. He swerved the steering wheel abruptly, directing the car toward the animal. Iriska shot a cautious look at the encroaching vehicle, inching too close to the curb and leaving her stranded. She needed to detour onto the grassy track. Unfortunately, an array of concrete debris obstructed her path. The vehicle was too swift, with no room for reconsideration. Thus, in desperation, Iriska hoisted herself onto the cement chunk. "Clever!" the driver spat in frustration. He edged the car closer to the block and blared his horn loudly. The unexpected din caught Iriska by surprise, and she leaped sideways in a startled manner. This made her hooves slip on the rubble, throwing her off balance, and she tumbled. The vehicle sped off amid the monstrous laughter of the driver and his accomplice. To Iriska's shock, she discovered that her hooves couldn't find their footing. They had slipped into a deep pit camouflaged by concrete blocks. Her front legs remained above the pit, but the horse made no moves to climb out, sinking deeper instead. Each struggle only caused her to sink lower as the rough concrete scraped against her skin, causing pain. In fear and desperation, Iriska began to neigh loudly, crying for help. Sadly, there was no one nearby to hear her. The construction workers on a new project, hidden behind a tall wall, were engrossed with their jackhammers several blocks away. Barely any pedestrians were on this quiet street, and Iriska could only hope her caretaker would realize she was missing by evening. The horse continued to call out, losing her voice to the effort, which only frightened nearby birds into flight. As she attempted to free herself, Iriska scraped her knees against the concrete, and the wounds throbbed with unbearable pain. The awkward position caused her whole body to ache, and attempts to move only increased her discomfort. As time passed, it was soon noon. The sun rose to its zenith, relentlessly scorching everything below. The heat from the ground rose with a light breeze that did nothing to cool the environment. Usually in such sizzling weather, Iriska would find solace under shady trees or splashing about in the river. However, she now found herself directly under the sweltering sun, unable to escape its heat. Adding to her troubles were swarms of pesky flies that attacked her face, particularly aiming for her eyes, ears, and nose. Desperately, Iriska swung her head repeatedly in an unsuccessful attempt to ward off the incessant bugs. However, this didn't improve her situation. Her vision soon began to darken. In her worn-out state, Iriska managed to give one final pained neigh, which sounded more like the bellow of an angered rhino. Even she was surprised by this alien sound and immediately grew silent. Providence took pity on her when the construction workers behind the tall wall decided to break for lunch. They put aside their tools and moved to the quiet end of the street, away from the dust stirred up by their drilling activities. As they sat down anticipating their lunch, a peculiar noise reached their ears. "What's that?" someone asked apprehensively. "A lion?" came an immediate response. "Nah, seems more like a tiger," another voice chimed in. "Hey, get real. They don't inhabit around here," interrupted their boss. "Better check beyond the fence to see for yourself." Being the youngest on the team, one worker was nominated to go reconnoiter. He managed to hoist himself upon the wall and saw a peculiar sight. A horse's head popping out from the lawn, shaking off bothersome flies. No other part of the creature was in sight. He called on his fellow workers to witness this extraordinary sight. "That's where we plan to lay the sewer pipes," the boss observed. "The pipe route was supposed to pass through here. It seems the horse fell into an unidentified pit and cannot find its way out. Come on, guys, let's help it out." They agreed to bring along a crane and harness straps. Leaving their lunch behind, the builders banded together to initiate a rescue operation, anticipating an easy recovery of the horse, followed by cheers of victory. However, that's not how events transpired. As the men approached the scene, they saw the horse panting, casting desperate eyes in their direction. The poor creature yearned for freedom. The builders examined the horse from all angles, but it had sunk so deep that it appeared impossible to slide the straps underneath. Her rear area was tightly enclosed by concrete blocks. The initial plan was to lift these blocks, but the imminent sewer drains were so deeply embedded that extraction seemed impossible without substantial machinery. "What should we do?" one worker pondered aloud, stroking his face. "What about demolishing a part of the slab?" came a suggestion. "That should free up space. We can then position the straps under the front limbs and hoist her up." Applause and nods of agreement acknowledged this ingenious suggestion. The builders began arranging jackhammers, hammers, and drills. If Eriska thought she had landed in a nightmarish situation, she hadn't seen anything yet. First, the men comforted her by patting her gently and whispering consoling words, then descended upon her with their tools. The drilling noise startled the horse. Trapped and petrified, Eriska couldn't make her escape. She shuddered in fear as the noise reverberated each time the tool was activated. "Look at the sturdiness of that concrete," a builder exclaimed, wiping sweat off his brow. His co-workers watched the ongoing operation, stunned and amazed by the construction. Over the period the drill was in action, the man achieved only a minuscule fragment. "You clearly lack the knack for it," another man dismissed him. "I'll take over." Unfortunately, the next craftsman didn't fare any better. The whole crew inspected the functioning of the drill and then switched over to the jackhammer. Being more sensitive was essential to avoid harm to the horse, so the men endeavored to dislodge the concrete bits parallel to the creature's body shape. The sight turned Eriska's stomach. She recoiled from the drill, nearly folding at the sight of the potent jackhammer. Her heart thrashed violently within her chest. Failing to grasp that they were working to free her, Eriska's only thoughts leaned toward an end to it all. A man kneeled by Eriska's head, offering calming strokes while swatting relentless pests irritating her eyes. Flies, unlike Eriska, found serenity amidst the racket of the construction tools. This tranquil gesture kept Iris from a complete mental meltdown. Despite her stark fright, she leaned into the man for solace. The workers chipped away at the concrete slab, yet a minor rampart kept the horse from liberation. To circumvent injuring Eriska, they fetched hammers and mallets. The concrete was battered into minute bits. Lunchtime came and went, but the workers didn't cease their efforts. Eventually, a part of the trap's wall gave in after a few hours. Iris, eager to break free, was held back. They couldn't risk her stepping on sharp fragments or getting wedged. Nimbly, the workers threaded straps underneath Eriska's hooves, fixing the ends to the lift. The crane budged the creature up and over the pit. Iris promptly extended toward the ground and got to all fours, managing a few steps to loosen her stiff muscles. The construction crew heartily celebrated the successful rescue of Iris. What seemed a simple task had escalated into a substantial rescue operation. The concrete was solid and thick. The artisans circled the remnants. Why construct domiciles from materials that a mere hammer can dismantle, while the drainage system is so robust? Pondered a man. Your guess is as good as mine, but we've got an aperture to mend, the supervisor retorted. Those pipes still need to be joined to the main system. The construction workers gauged the extent of the havoc they had inadvertently wreaked, then let out an exhausted sigh. Their eyes drifted back to where the rescued mare stood, but she was nowhere to be seen. Iris was in a rush to get back to her stable. It had been the most regrettable day she had ever experienced, and all she longed for was to be back in her secure stable. The sight that greeted her owner when he showed up in the yard completely took him by surprise. The once glorious chestnut coat was now covered in a heavy layer of dirt. The flanks and knee joints were reduced to raw, bloody messes. Iris twitched her ears nervously, reacting with a quiver and a sore whinny to the distant noise of a chainsaw. Spotting the trough crammed with fresh grass, Iris hastily plowed into it. The mare consumed several pails of water and emptied the trough in unprecedented time. Finally, she collapsed onto the straw-covered ground, too drained and startled to wait for evening to settle in. She wished to never find herself in such a predicament again. Meanwhile, a young man and woman shared a joyful smile as they strolled hand in hand toward the nearby brook, taking in the aroma of the wild greenery surrounding them. They were so infatuated with each other that nothing else seemed to garner their attention. Now and then, their focus would shift from each other's faces to scan the natural beauty around them. Suddenly, the young woman veered her attention toward the river, her eyes widening in shock as her hand instinctively moved to cover her gasp. The young man stepped forward, ready to protect her. But they weren't under attack. There, in the tall, dense grass, lay a horse, or what was barely left of one. To call the skeleton covered with thin, stretched-out skin a horse would be generous. Its skin clung to its ribs, threatening to burst at any moment. Curious dried patches covered its body, attracting a swarm of buzzing flies. The sight was unsettling. "Such a pitiful beast," the young woman exclaimed, her loud voice bringing the wildlife around them to a standstill. The horse, previously motionless, began to show signs of life at the exclamation. Seeing this, the young couple's hair stood on end. Moments later, a combined shriek of terror reverberated along the riverbank. They fled from the horrifying view, taking refuge on a dusty path where they caught their breath. As they feared, nothing was in pursuit. They managed to subdue the chaos within, enabling them to think rationally. "It's alive," the young lady whispered, stupefied. "It's still alive?" "It seems lifeless," the lad voiced his opinion. "But it's stirring. We ought to take a closer look. Perhaps it wasn't moving on its own, but something was inside it?" The young lady shrugged in confusion and sent her knight in shining armor to conduct a thorough check while she waited for the inspection outcome. She didn't want to witness a predator preying on a poor creature. However, the lad soon confirmed that, apart from the horse, there was no one else in sight. The horse was certainly not lifeless. As he moved closer, the frail horse turned her head slightly, letting out a weak whinny. The horse visibly struggled to move, but its skin and bones physique slightly pulsed. Its eyelids were slightly ajar, as if it wanted to look at the approaching person, but couldn't. A mysterious red film veiled its iris. The lower lip hung oddly, not entirely shutting the mouth. Legs and tail were stationary and the ears quivered sporadically, but it could easily be mistaken for the wind. The horse seemed completely drained, clinging to life by a thread. The young man surveyed the surroundings, puzzled by how the horse ended up here. The grass around was untrampled, as if the animal had always lain here. He walked away briefly, deep in thought, then returned to the young lady to share his views. "It doesn't matter how she landed here," she dismissed. "The point is, what do we do now? She seems terrible. She might draw her last breath any time, and I'm clueless who might aid horses around these parts." Instantly, the lad remembered that there were a couple of horses kept in the next village, where people traveled from the surrounding areas to ride. Reaching the owners didn't take long. They couldn't comprehend much from the confused explanation of the pair, but pledged to arrive quickly. Shortly after, dust stirred up on the route to the river under the tread. Both young man and lady were ecstatic, waving avidly as a vehicle with an attached trailer for horse transport parked beside them. To find the animal in such proximity flabbergasted them, and they gasped in horror upon seeing the state of the ailing horse. There was no question of the horse getting onto the trailer on her own. Their only hope was that she could cling to life until the vet arrived. 4 people were unable to lift the feeble yet weighty creature. a child rushed out to the street to plead for assistance from neighbors and friends. The men rallied together, hoisting the worn-out body of the horse, sliding a cloth beneath it, each clutching a corner, and raising it from the ground. The horse, with a nervous flurry, opened her eyes and managed a weak kick of her hoof. She was too drained for anything more. The creature was heaved into the trailer. The lofty door shut, and the wheels turned gently, ushering the needy creature toward a promising new chapter. Helpers and a vet were already stationed near the stable, notified by the compassionate new owners en route home. People gingerly unloaded the horse from the trailer. The vet got to work instantly, pacing around the sickly animal, conducting examinations, palpating, and collecting samples. Soon, officers who were summoned arrived on the scene. They were responding to an animal cruelty report, gathering statements from the doctor, new owners, and volunteer assistants. However, they expressed reservations about the likelihood of tracking down the previous horse owner. Thus, justice seemed unlikely. The vet attended to the horse with injections, treated the skin scabs, and fixed up a drip. Selfless volunteers aided in relocating the creature to an available enclosure. The horse was discovered to be deeply drained, with the vet unsure of its survival odds. Despite these odds, everyone was committed to nursing the horse back to health, offering pristine, comprehensive care. A significant issue was that the horse had lost its interest in food and found difficulty drinking water. This was due to a tick infestation, causing inflamed spots all over its body. Blisters would erupt on the affected zones, split open, and morph into scabs, all alongside acute itching. The horse, seeking respite from the scabs, scratched everywhere within reach. The sickness had entirely eradicated its desire for food, reducing the once powerful and trim creature to a skeletal frame. Regrettably, that wasn't all. The horse's third eyelid was inflamed and reddened. The vet collected samples, fearing the worst, a cancerous growth. This condition could be rectified via surgery, but only after the horse regained its strength. Dental issues surfaced too, and delays in treatment weren't considered wise. The stable morphed into a makeshift infirmary for a couple of weeks. The vet maintained daily visits to their patient. Eventually, the horse was freed from the ticks, and its skin's scabs faded. The dental procedures permitted the unfortunate creature to feed on its own. Initially, the couple had to administer nutrients intravenously, as if hand-rearing a foal. But soon, the horse had enough strength to eat on its own, despite its head still requiring human support. The poor creature was barely aware of its surroundings. It felt so awful at first that it didn't have the will to live, simply lying there waiting for its end. But the determined couple didn't abandon it. They would come to check on the animal several times per night, changing its drip feed. Gradually, the horse started to recognize familiar voices. It would touch its owners with its nose and respond to the vet's energetic conversation, though it was barely able to see anything around it. It became reliant on sounds and the sensation of carrying hands. With time, the horse managed to maneuver from one side to the other and could position itself on its belly. Its strength increased to the point where it could maintain a somewhat upright posture for several continuous hours. However, standing was still a problem, which frightened and confused the horse. It would involuntarily flex its legs but couldn't put any weight on them. The legs felt foreign, as if belonging to someone else. The vet suggested that the horse was severely weakened and hadn't used its limbs for so long that it was incapable of jumping up and running off. Physical therapy was necessary for its recovery, prompting issues as the horse needed to be helped up, supported, and nudged along for each step. The once thin frame gradually filled out due to the care and abundant feeding, which were beneficial benchmarks but also presented physical challenges. The animal became so dense that no less than 8 people were needed to carry it. The couple devised a makeshift apparatus from blankets and braces to hold the horse upright in the stable. However, physical aid was still required for outdoor walks. Fortunately, their story moved many friends and neighbors who volunteered to assist each evening. Initially, the position of the horse's legs had to be manually adjusted, but consistent therapy sessions soon proved beneficial. After several days, it began to clumsily move its limbs without aid. Though a modest improvement, it was a measurable one. The horse and its human helpers were equally exhausted, yet no one was ready to throw in the towel. The dedication and months of patient therapy were eventually rewarded. The horse managed to stand unaided, and eventually walked slowly. There was no rush. The owner would guide it a few steps before allowing it to rest again in the stable. But the mare grew weary of her involuntary confinement. She eagerly took in the piquant sense of fresh grass outside with her nose, yearning to gallivant freely across open fields. Not long after, the veterinarian declared that the creature had regained enough strength for eye surgery. The operation wasn't daunting for the horse, as the tumor was impeding most of her sight. The mare was duly nestled back into the trailer and taken to the clinic for the surgical operation. The doctor eradicated the affected tissues. Post-surgery, the mare's eyes hurt considerably, but that didn't hinder her from exploring her surroundings. Things that appeared vague in her memory now sharpened. The creature saw her new caregivers for the first time, the stable, and the pen where she ventured during her workout sessions. Eye drops were introduced in addition to her usual regimen and exercises. The mare endured all unquestioningly. She remained tranquil, seemingly comprehending every word spoken by her handlers. The horse turned out to be incredibly calm and astute. The owners were overjoyed with their new household addition. Soon enough, the mare regained enough strength that the handlers began allowing her into a large pen with 2 other stable residents. The newcomer quickly gravitated towards the seasoned inhabitants, successfully placating the young foal's vigor, and began grazing on freshly trimmed grass alongside his mother. Months after being welcomed into her new abode, the mare bore no resemblance to the emaciated figure she once was, covered in a thin layer of skin, edging closer to mortality. Her coat radiated on her filled-out flanks. Only slightly overgrown patches on her hindquarters and her cautious demeanor hinted at her past trials. The owner allowed things to progress naturally. However, the mare soon began to show signs of longing when she saw the saddle. She observed sorrowfully as her stablemates took turns accommodating adults and children on their backs. On a sun-drenched day, her handler led the newcomer out to the open and started saddling her up. The mare whinnied joyously. The handler's weight was a bit hefty for the creature, but she didn't fuss. They exited the stable area and took a gentle tour around the field. At that moment, the mare felt happier than she ever had. Despite the pain and despair she'd endured, surrounded by affectionate humans, she felt loved. The mare was cognizant that she now had a forever family and wouldn't ever be deserted, no matter the circumstances. "Comply or starve!" hollered the rotund farmer, brandishing a whip, handling it expertly. It was evident he was well experienced, exhibiting an utter lack of compassion. His whip ended in small spikes that would pierce the animal's skin, forcing them to comply with his desires. Typically, this method yielded the expected results. However, this time it failed. Fionnet had been raised amidst the warmth of a stable setting. His elderly caretaker cherished his mare greatly, extending the same level of adoration to her offspring. But soon the man acknowledged he wasn't financially capable of providing for both. Aging had brought along complications, and the imminent winter presented its challenges, especially with a growing being to look after. Begrudgingly, the elderly man started considering getting Fionnet a new home. They couldn't secure a place for the young one in the familiar environment, so he was sold to a nearby spot. The animal was procured to offer horseback riding services to clients. Yet Fionnet wasn't adjusting well. He proved too unruly. Initially, they assumed his wildness would mitigate with time. But as the months went by, the young horse, despite maturing, failed to develop a connection with humans. He resisted being saddled and was prone to hostility. Nevertheless, he could be led on a leash. Eventually, the new owner grew weary of feeding the stubborn colt, and Fionnet was put up for auction once more. This time, luck deserted him, and he ended up in the possession of a callous farmer. The farmer had managed to amass considerable wealth over a few years. He had taken possession of all surrounding lands, setting up his pig and poultry farm and erecting a new mill. Overall, his affairs were booming. Money poured in abundantly. At first, the farmer redirected all his profits into business development, but gradually he shifted his perspective. He pondered when he would actually derive pleasure from life and began to splurge on his own whims and desires. Hence, a life-size monument, a new fancy car that was immediately damaged on the crude paths, and his personal brand of cigars using tobacco grown in the adjoining field came into existence in the otherwise unpretentious village. Then the man contemplated participating in horse races. Not that he considered riding himself, but he was interested in training a champion horse. Fionnet looked promising. Ignoring the details of breeds and the organization of horse races, the farmer brought Fionnet home. But he instantly faced the horse's stubborn demeanor. Fionnet's strong will irritated the man. Initially, he attempted to control the colt by limiting its feed, but it yielded insignificant results. Every day he brandished the whip, relentless in his pursuit to crush Fionnet's spirit. However, the determined beast resisted, despite the scars and visible ribs testifying to its suffering. Horse racing had become a distant memory for the farmer. His current mission was to overpower the stubborn creature. Months turned into years, but the horse's determination remained unyielding. In fits of uncontrollable anger, the man was relentless, his fury raging on for a full half hour until he was left breathless. "I'm not done with you," he groaned, depleted. "I'll take a break, then return to this task. I'll whip you until you fall, and even more to assert my authority here." Wearily, the farmer departed as Fionnet recovered. The animal seemed to grasp that the worst was yet to come, and that it needed to flee. But escape seemed impossible while shackled by the heavy metal chain around its neck, fastened to a post in the backyard. Resolute, Fionnet lowered its head, took a wider stance, and began tugging at the chain. The metal cut through its skin, lacerating its ears and drawing blood. Yet Fionnet was undeterred. Its hind legs bore the vivid reminders of the whip's fury, but a few more would be a worthy sacrifice. Perseverance paid dividends. A sudden jerk at an unimaginable angle allowed the chain to slip off one ear, a move so excruciating it resulted in a sharp, painful neigh that reached the ears of the farmer lounging on his patio with a refreshing drink in hand. The unexpected sound stirred his wrath. Fionnet couldn't decipher his words, but the tone was enough to fuel its determination. Fionnet sent its secondary plan into motion, braced its legs, and gave the chain another powerful yank. It understood the process now, the method to its hoped-for freedom. Its owner was not just an ill-tempered tyrant, but also miserly, revealed by the old worn-out chain holding him captive. At one critical tug, the chain snapped, leaving a truncated piece hanging near its snout. Staggering back in surprise, the animal fell, crashing into the canopy supports. The ensuing chaos in the yard enraged the farmer. He sprang to his feet, whip in hand, ready to vent his anger on Fionnet when he realized the animal was no longer there. The shattered chain lay desolately. The canopy support was nearly collapsed, and the only remnants of Fionnet were hoofprints. Overwhelmed with frustration, the farmer seized his firearm, hopped in his vehicle, and set out in pursuit of the rebellious creature. But his efforts were in vain. Determined not to let it end that way, he returned home, rounded up his laborers and locals, and declared a reward for the one who brought back Fionnet. The crowd dispersed to seek the horse. A handful of people even chanced upon the horse's trail and moved toward it, but couldn't muster the courage to shoot. The beaten, thin sides of the horse didn't speak well of the farmer. They took the horse to a safer distance to ensure it wouldn't end up captured again and overlooked its bloody snout. Who knew the extent of the erratic owner's actions? Fionnet had fled, reveling in newfound freedom, but couldn't rid itself of the chains still bound to its head. In a last attempt, the links of the chain tore into the skin, a warm liquid streaming down its snout. The spots where the chain had been intensely ached, yet the horse never paused for a moment and continued running from its harsh owner. As Fionnet's energy began to dissipate, it took moments to rest before resuming its journey. Fionnet chose secluded paths. Having witnessed an abundance of human brutality, it no longer wished to associate with humans. It avoided populated places, kept a good distance from roads, and retreated into bushy areas at the sound of human voices. As it was early fall, there was a surplus of grass. Fionnet was surviving, albeit poorly, but compared to the sparse meals at the stingy farmer's residence, the open had more to offer. With the colder months approaching, the supply of food dwindled. Leaves began falling, the bushes no longer served as shelters, and food availability became rarer each passing day. After some time, Fionnet still hadn't managed to free itself from the chain around its snout, but it had come to terms with the constant agony and chose to ignore it. In early December, Fionnet crossed paths with humans. Earlier, the horse had met some mushroom gatherers, but they parted ways indifferently. This occasion was different. Fionney encountered a compassionate individual. He attempted to get closer, but swiftly understood that the creature was untamed and wouldn't allow itself to be captured. From a distance, the man noticed the chain on the snout and decided to aid the beast in getting free of it. He left Fionney to its devices at the same location they had met. Rapidly, the man ventured toward the closest town, sought a vet, and a representative from an animal welfare organization. As a team, they returned to the uncommon, desolate, tiny forest in search of the horse. The stallion stood out. His shining golden-brown color did not blend in with the surroundings anymore. The lush foliage no longer concealed the horse, so he was spotted quickly. He retreated hesitantly as the people approached. Capturing and examining the horse was a strenuous task. Hence, tranquilizer guns were brought into action. Fortunately, their aim was accurate, and the horse soon fell into a deep slumber. Walking up toward him, their faces recoiled in shock and revulsion. The chain had dug into the skin for numerous months and had fused with the animal's head. Astonishingly, Fionney didn't suffer any eye damage due to the close proximity of the metal. The chain was initially cut from the loose end, and then it was time for the operation. The vet began extracting the embedded chain by cutting away the ingrowths. Progress, however, was painstakingly slow. The metal put up a stubborn fight, surprising the medically trained professional. No infection at the contact points was a miracle. Had there been any, blood poisoning could have claimed Fionney's life long ago. Yet the animal still displayed a vibrant mood. Only one link had pus underneath it, which the vet meticulously cleaned. Incisions were treated with disinfectant, followed by a foaming spray to ease the wound and stop the bleeding. The first side of Fionney's face was clear, but for the other, the horse needed to be turned. Flipping him over seemed a huge task for the men, but due to Fionney's underweight condition, it was easier than anticipated. The operation continued until the horse was liberated from the chain. The tranquilizer's effects were fading rapidly, so the men stepped away urgently. Startled, Fionney jerked awake and immediately sprang up. Although the effects of the sedative weren't worn off completely, he began to move away from them. Only a couple of 100 meters from the crew, he noticed something peculiar. The accustomed tightness on his muzzle and constant agony had vanished. The once tightly bound chain hung loose. As Fionney experienced newfound liberty, the men pondered their next steps. Given its untamed nature, encouraging the creature to enter transportation to a horse breeder seemed unfathomable. However, the rescuers were apprehensive that without intervention, the animal might perish from starvation during the winter months. Snowfall was anticipated in a couple of days, and as a domesticated horse, finding food would be a challenge. An idea sparked in the mind of the man responsible for the tranquilizer. He carried a fervor for hunting and shared an acquaintance with the forester. Ordinarily, the man arranged several feeding stations in the forest during winter, providing hay and salt for deer. They communicated and agreed on transporting Fionney to the forester's territory. As it was a secluded area, the risk of the horse perishing from starvation was significantly reduced. The men found themselves near the ideal destination and took up the responsibility of leading the horse through the forest. Forming a half circle, they clapped and shouted to steer Fionney in the right direction. As Fionney preferred maintaining distance from humans, he inadvertently found himself in the forester's land. Once this was achieved, the rescuers retreated and their preoccupations consumed them. Inadvertently, they lost sight of the horse. As the season changed to spring and vegetation flourished, the hunter crossed paths with the forester. Much to their astonishment, the horse was spotted walking beside him with deep scars on its muzzle. It was revealed that the forester had tended to Fionney throughout the winter, providing oats, fruits, and vegetables. In due course, Fionney started demonstrating less resistance and fear towards the forester. He would exhibit joy upon seeing him and relish the food offered. The forester's gentleness and perseverance gradually made a dent in the animal's defenses. Several months into their association, Fionney allowed himself to be petted for the first time, subsequently finding solace beside the forester's cabin, refusing to leave. He shadowed the man as if he were a pet dog. The forester appreciated the challenge of winning the horse's trust and never exerted any pressure. He was hopeful that in a couple of years, he would have the privilege of riding in the forest. Fionney showed no signs of dreading this idea. Who knows if all